Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So welcome everybody to our Pāli class this week. We finally got to describing the past tense, and this is chapter 7 in an easy introduction to Pāli. It's our 9th Pāli class, and unfortunately this chapter, the way the author has presented it, we can't cover all of the details that he's given in 30 minutes. So I thought we would do it a little bit differently. We're going to take a look at how the past is described in the suttas, and then we're going to look at some of the main points about our aorist tense, which is the general past tense in Pāli. Now, we could have looked at a different textbook that gives a simpler description of the aorist tense. The issue is that we've been following this textbook so far, and so that we've learned certain vocabulary items, and so if we switch textbooks at this point, then I'd have to introduce all of those new vocabulary items. So we'll stick with this for now. And we thus far we haven't had any Zoom meetings, but if we want, it's still possible we can arrange a Zoom meeting before we finish this class. Now in Pāli, there are several ways of describing the past, and one of them is what they're calling the narrative present. I've forgotten the exact term, but they use the present tense to narrate the past. So you can think of this like a police blotter. 8 a.m. Suspect enters the house. 8:22. Suspect turns on the lights. 8:33. The suspect calls his friend. So it gives an account of the events using the present tense. In Pāli, we see that in most suttas. So evang me sitang etang samayang bhagava savatyang viharati. So on one occasion, ekang samayang bhagava, the Blessed One, savatyang viharati. The Blessed One is living in Savati. Viharati is the present tense. It means he lives. And it will go on there and describing things in the present tense. However, within the narrative, you have to be able to show the relative occurrence of events. So we can see, for example, we were looking at the Khanda Paritta. Sambahula bhikkhu yena bhagavaten upasanka mingsu. So a group of monks, Sambahula bhikkhu yena bhagavaten, towards the Buddha, upasanka mingsu. So upasanka mingsu, this is the aorist tense that we're learning today, and it is the general past tense that is used, or we would say it's equivalent to the simple past in English. However, and so upasanka mingsu, because it's sambahula bhikkhu, so they, and so we have this ending ingsu. If it was one monk, it would say anyataro bhikkhu yena bhagavaten upasanka mi. So you see the ending changes. And now, in this sutta, upasanka mingsu, then the next word is upasanka mitva. So we skimmed over that in a previous lesson. These 12 forms, actually we skimmed over it twice. And they're calling this the indeclinable past participle. And the reason is there's a different kind of past participle that changes its form depending on which particular noun it's modifying. Now, here upasankamati is he approaches or she approaches. Upasankamingsu, they approached. Upasankamitva can be translated as having approached. Okay, so we said a group of monks approached the Buddha, having approached, right? So this is showing our sequence in time. Like after that, you can say after that, Bhagavantang Abhivadedva, they paid respect to the Buddha. So Abhivadati is to pay respects to someone, like we learned about Vandati, which means to pay respect. So here we have Abhivandidva, Bhagavantang Ekamantang Attangsu. I think it's Attangsu. They stood. So Atasi would be he stood. This is again the past tense. They stood Attangsu. And then Ekamantang Teta Ko Te Bhikkhu. Ekamantang Teta. So this is the declinable past participle. Ekamantang is to one side. Teta. And so if for was one person, it would be Teto. And for the group, it's Teta. So they stood, having stood at one side, then they addressed the Buddha. So we have 3 different forms here. We have the 4 different forms that are indicating the past. So to start with, we have this present tense that's used. Bhagava Savati Viharati, the Buddha that was staying in Savatthi. And then we have our Upasamkamingsu, so we have our aorist or tense, which is that we can say our simple past tense. We have Upasamkamidva, having approached, which is our indeclinable past participle. And we have Teta, having stood, which is our declinable past participle. So you can see then it can get it's important to understand all 4 of these in time. Today we're especially looking at how to form this aorist tense. Now, in chapter 7, the author of An Easy Introduction to Pāli has given 4 forms that can be used to form this aorist tense based on the root or the stem. Now, I've been trying to list the roots together with the verbs, but I haven't always been successful. Sometimes due to time or sometimes due to carelessness, I haven't added them in. But if you remember, for the root gam, which means to go, we have a stem gach. So to go, he or she goes would be gacchati. I go would be gacchami. Buddhang saranang gacchami, right? I go to refuge to the Buddha. But the root is gam. So sometimes when we form the aorist tense, we're going to be using the root. And sometimes we'll be using the stem. And as the author of this textbook points out, not every verb has all 4 forms of the aorist tense, or the past tense. So it's more important to be able to recognize the forms when you encounter them than to be able to conjugate all the verbs in these 4 different ways, which is one of the reasons why we're not going to go through this in full detail today. Another thing to keep in mind is that there are a fairly limited number of actions that people tend to do in the suttas. Usually people are listening, they are approaching, they're preaching, they are paying respects, they're describing, sometimes they're bathing, sometimes they're cooking, sometimes they're offering. You never hear them typing, you never hear them entering a password, you never hear them you very rarely hear them driving a chariot or something like that. I mean, time to time you do, but there are certain verbs that are far, far more common in Pāli. It's not like a living language. And if you start reading the Jataka stories, then you have a wider variety of verbs, because the narrative structure involves sort of larger stories, stories involving a larger number of characters with different kinds of occupations. But if you stick with the suttas and the Abhidhamma, you'll see a fairly limited number of verbs. So that's supposed to be comforting. I don't know if it makes it more overwhelming or less. So let's have a look at what it says in the chapter here. The usual past tense, which is called the aorist tense, is generally formed directly from the root, more rarely from the present tense stem, by adding special inflections. In the past tense, an A is optionally used before the root. This A goes between the prefix, if any, and the root. It is called the augment. The vowel A is prefixed to the root as an indication of past time, though differences of inflections avoids ambiguity in most cases. The aorist is used for all kinds of past actions, including the historical or narrative use of the past tense. The plural form of the first and second persons is not often found in the Pāli texts. The third person is extremely common, both in singular and in plural forms. So, as the author mentions, the third person is far more common. It's far more common because usually we don't have a personal narration. We have events being described from the third person perspective. So they approached the Buddha, or he approached the Buddha, etc. Not I approached the Buddha. I said this, you said that. It's not that common in Pāli. So we're going to skip the first three of the explanations that he gives for the aorist tense. And we're going to go to what he's calling the is aorist. And we'll just read that description. The is aorist is by far the most common in Pāli. It is formed by adding the secondary personal endings by means of the suffix is, either to the root in its guna grade or the stem of the present. This is a grammatical procedure at the end of which the conjugation looks like in the s aorist except for in the third person plural, whereas the is remains present after the grammatical changes. In the first person singular, however, the ending may be ung, or it would be a plain ung or a ung. So that in the case of a ung, the is also remains present. In the following tables, okay, so I think actually it's a little bit too technical. So let's just look at the examples for the is aorist. So we'll look at his example for the verb to go. Remember, the root is gam, G-A-M, and the stem is gach, G-A-C-C-H. So I went, ahang gaching, or ahang agaming. Now remember something that was just mentioned, but maybe be obscured by the linguistic jargon there. Sometimes an A is added to the aorist tense at the start. So here the stem is gum, but we add the A at the front, agam, and then we have the ending ing. So we have gaching or agaming for the first person. So you can think of it like ahang is I, right? And so you can think like the I with the M with the dot, the ing sound, it might remind you of like I am, right? In English we have I apostrophe M, I'm. So you can use that sort of as a mnemonic to remember this ing is indicating I have done something. So gaching or agaming. Tvang gachi, tvang agami. So you went. So gachi, agami, you went. So or saw, so he or she, gachi, agami. So the second and third person singular are both the same. They both end in an I. So remember in the example I gave, atasi, he stood to one side. This happens commonly. Somebody will approach the Buddha and stand to one side. Or nasidi, having to sit down in the past tense, sat down. Gachim mayang, so we. Gachimha, agamimha. So we went. Gachimha, agamimha. So They tumhe gachit agamit. They tumhe gachit agamit. Te. I'm sorry. Tumhe, that was you plural. Tumhe is you plural. Gachita agamita, so you went. And then they plural. Te is gachingsu agamingsu. They went. Gachingsu agamingsu. Remember we learned upasamkamingsu just a moment ago? They approached. So this is similar to that. So the author has given some more examples of our aorist here in the IS. So I think we'll go through those examples rather than going through the questions. Maybe we'll take 2 lessons to complete the past tense, to the aorist tense. So the example for to go away, pakami is I go away. Here, pakaming, right? We learned in is indicating the aorist, first person singular. Ahang pakaming, I went away. He gives the alternate forms pakamisang, also pakamisang. So sometimes there'll be different forms. Tvang pakami, you went away. Tvang pakami. He or she went away. Sa or so pakami. Again. So remember the second and third person singular are the same. Pakami. Tvang pakami, you went away. So pakami, he went away. Mayang pakamimha, we went away. Mayang pakamimha. Tumhe pakamit, you plural. Tumhe pakamit, you went away. And then te pakamisung. Te pakamisung, they went away. These other 2 verbs that he gives as examples are also very common. For basati is he or she speaks. So here we have basing or basing. Notice the word pakami here. It hasn't used this prefix of a for the past tense to indicate the past tense, but for basati, it uses the prefix a. So, abasing, I said. Ahang abasing, I said. Tvang abasi, you said. So abasi, he said. Mayang abasimha, we said. Tumhe abasit, you plural said. Te abasisung, they said. And then finally our third example is nisidati. Nisidati is to sit down, or he or she sits down, and in the past tense we have nisiding, so I sat. Or then we have the alternative form nisidasang, I sat down. Then for you, tvang nisidi. Or for she, sa nisidi, she sat down. Mayang nisidimha, we sat down. Nisidimha, you sat down. Nisidit, and they sat down. Te nisidisung. Now, there's some irregular forms the author is introducing here. This is for the word spoken or said, aha, and this is used quite frequently, especially in verse. The form aha, he has said, is singular, while ahu is originally plural, but it is also found with a singular sense. He, they, he has, or they have said, or it has been said. So this is aha or ahu. Okay, and now the author is also introducing some possessive pronouns. So we have, for the nominative case, I, mayang, and then for the possessive case, mine, maihang, or mamang, or mama. Maihang, mama, mamang means my. And then for the plural, amhakang, or amhang, amhakang or amhang, our. And so yours, it can be tavang or toihang. Tavang or toihang, your. And your plural, tumhang or tumhakang, tumhakang. Tumhang or tumhakang, your plural. And then for the masculine form, for he, his, we have tasa. But for the feminine form, we have a different form. It's tasa. And then there's an alternate form, tisa or tisaya. Oh, sorry. So tasa also can be tasaya, tisa, or tisaya. So we have 4 forms for the feminine: hers, her. And then for the plural, for his, te sanam or te sam, his, plural. And then for her plural, tasam or tasanam. And then there's a very short list of other vocabulary items. So, aparanha is a masculine verb. It means afternoon, aparanha. Chirang is an indeclinable. It means for a long time. Eva is an indeclinable. It's an emphatic particle. It means just, quite, even, or only. As sometimes it's added to the verse only to fill out the poetic meter. But sometimes it doesn't actually add meaning to the verse, it just makes it sound pleasant. Hio is an indeclinable and it means yesterday. Pato is an indeclinable and it means early in the morning. Patarasa is a masculine noun and it means the morning meal. Pubanha is masculine and it means the forenoon. Purato is indeclinable and it means in the presence of. Sayamasa is a masculine noun and it means the evening meal or dinner. Via is an indeclinable and it means like. So I hope it wasn't too overwhelming today. We'll go through the exercises for chapter 7 in the next lesson. So I hope that you will be happy, healthy, peaceful, and content, and swiftly attain the peace of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.